The ancient pines of the Blackwood forest stood like silent, watchful giants, their branches weaving a canopy that barely let the afternoon sun peek through. This was the territory of the Ironclaw Pack, a name that spoke of strength and unbreakable will. Within the heart of this forest lay the pack's main living area, a clearing dotted with sturdy cabins and a large, central fire pit that was the heart of their community. Here the air was always filled with the sounds of life, the playful shouts of children already showing their wolfish speed, the low chatter of warriors returning from patrol, and the general hum of a powerful, thriving family. It was a place where strength was everything, where the ability to shift quickly and run fiercely was the measure of one's worth. And on the very edge of this bustling, noisy world there was Maeve. Maeve was a quiet girl with thoughtful eyes the color of moss after a rain, and she was currently on her hands and knees, scrubbing the stone floor of the common hall. A bucket of soapy, lukewarm water sat beside her, and the rough bristles of the brush scraped rhythmically against the stone. This was one of her many chores, a daily ritual that marked her place within the pack. To anyone watching, she seemed small, almost fragile, a stark contrast to the robust and muscular forms of the other young wolves her age. Her wolf, the inner spirit that defined every pack member, was a quiet, timid thing. While others could summon their powerful beasts in the blink of an eye, Maeve's wolf remained hidden, a whisper in the back of her mind, its form too faint and small to ever fully emerge. Because of this she was known as the Human, a title spoken with a sneer, a label that marked her as the weakest, the least of them all. The meanest of her teasers was a girl named Sonia. Sonia was everything the pack admired, tall, strong, with a confident swagger and a wolf that was a sleek, powerful hunter. She walked over to where Maeve was working, her friends snickering behind her. "You missed a spot, Human," Sonia said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She pointed a toe at a perfectly clean section of the floor. "Better get it. We can't have our common hall dirty just because you're lazy." Maeve didn't look up. She simply moved her brush to the spot Sonia had indicated, her shoulders tensing. She had learned long ago that answering back only made things worse. The teasing was a constant, dull ache, like a stone in her shoe she could never remove. After she finished the floors, her next task was to gather the enormous pile of laundry from the week. The basket was nearly as big as she was, filled with the sweaty training clothes and tunics of the pack's warriors. She struggled to lift it, her arms trembling under the weight as she carried it towards the washing lines at the edge of the clearing. It was at that moment that Ragnar, the Alpha, emerged from his cabin. He was a young leader, but he carried the weight of his role with a solemn gravity that made him seem older. His shoulders were broad, his gaze was as sharp and gray as a winter storm, and a quiet power radiated from him that commanded respect without him ever having to raise his voice. He was surveying his pack, his home, ensuring all was in order, when his eyes fell upon the scene. He saw Maeve staggering under the heavy basket, her small frame looking impossibly delicate. And he saw Sonia, leaning against a tree nearby, laughing with her friends as she watched Maeve struggle. A frown creased Ragnar's brow. This was not the way of a strong pack. A strong pack lifted up all its members. It did not crush the weakest underfoot. He felt a strange, unfamiliar twinge in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name, seeing Maeve treated so poorly. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. He simply started walking, his stride long and purposeful. He walked past Sonia, his stormy gaze flicking to her for just a second, a silent reprimand that instantly wiped the smile from her face. He didn't stop until he was right beside Maeve. "That is too heavy for one person," he said, his voice a low rumble, not unkind but firm. Before she could even process that the Alpha was speaking to her, he reached down and took the massive basket from her arms as if it weighed nothing. He carried it effortlessly to the washing lines and set it down. Maeve could only stare, her heart hammering against her ribs. No one, absolutely no one, had ever helped her with her chores before. She stood there, frozen, as Ragnar turned back to her. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a fleeting second she thought she saw something other than pity in his eyes, something like curiosity. But he said nothing more, simply giving her a brief nod before walking away to attend to his alpha duties, leaving Maeve in a state of stunned confusion. The rest of the day passed in a blur for Maeve. The memory of Ragnar's simple act of kindness replayed in her mind, a small, warm ember in the cold reality of her daily life. When her chores were finally done, she sought out her favorite hiding place, a secluded spot near a babbling creek just beyond the main clearing. Here she was invisible. Here she could pull a worn leather-bound book from its hiding place in a hollow log and lose herself in stories of brave knights and faraway lands. It was her only escape, the only place where she didn't feel like a failure. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the energy in the pack territory began to change. A buzz of excitement filled the air. Tonight was the night of the full moon run, the most sacred and exhilarating night for any werewolf pack. One by one, the pack members began to gather in the main clearing. The air crackled with energy. There were low growls of anticipation, laughter, and the sound of bones beginning to crack and reshape. In flashes of light and swirling fur, the powerful humans shifted, transforming into magnificent wolves of all sizes and colors. They paced and yipped, eager to feel the forest floor beneath their paws and the wild call of the moon in their blood. Maeve watched from the shadows of her cabin's doorway, her heart aching with a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical pain. She hugged her arms around herself, wishing more than anything that she could join them, that she could feel the freedom of the run, that she could belong. High in his own cabin, Ragnar stood by his window, looking down at the gathering pack. He saw the powerful wolves, his loyal fighters ready for the run. His gaze swept over the crowd, and then it stopped, drawn to the small solitary figure in the doorway of the farthest cabin. Was Maeve. He watched her watching them, and he saw the deep longing on her face, a look of such pure sorrow that it struck him deeply. That strange pull in his chest returned, stronger this time, a tug that was impossible to ignore. The pack below began to move, a river of fur and muscle flowing into the dark embrace of the forest, their joyful howls echoing through the trees. Ragnar should have been leading them. It was his place, his duty. But he found he couldn't move. He couldn't join the run. The image of Maeve, alone and left behind, was fixed in his mind. Making a decision he himself didn't fully understand, he turned from the window, walked out of his cabin, and instead of following his pack into the woods, he began to walk towards Maeve's cabin. Maeve was so lost in her own sadness that she didn't hear him approach. The first she knew of his presence was the soft crunch of his boots on the gravel path. She jumped, turning around to find the Alpha standing just a few feet away. The moonlight silvered his broad shoulders and cast his face in sharp relief. She immediately dropped her gaze, a flush of embarrassment heating her cheeks. "Alpha," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, I was going inside." Ragnar didn't reply immediately. He just stood there looking at her. The sounds of the pack run were fading into the distance, leaving a heavy silence behind. "You did not join the run," he stated softly, though it was not a question. Maeve simply shook her head, unable to form words. Then, to her utter astonishment, Ragnar took a step closer. His eyes fell upon the book she had clutched tightly in her hand. "What are you reading?" he asked, his voice a low, quiet rumble in the twilight. The question was so simple, so ordinary, and yet it was the kindest, most human thing anyone had said to her in years. The mighty Alpha of the Ironclaw pack was not running with his wolves under the full moon. He was here talking to her. The days that followed the full moon were painted with a new, uncertain color for Maeve. The memory of Ragnar's quiet conversation by her cabin was a treasure she kept locked deep inside her, taking it out only in the solitude of her room to examine and marvel at. He had not spoken of strength or shifting, nor had he offered empty pity. He had asked about her book, about the stories of kings and queens from a world long gone, and he had listened, his stormy eyes fixed on her with an intensity that was neither demanding nor dismissive, but simply attentive. For a few fleeting minutes she had not been Maeve the weak or Maeve the human. She had just been Maeve. The pack, however, had not changed. Sonia's glares were, if anything, more venomous, fueled by a jealousy she didn't understand. The chores remained, the whispers in the dining hall persisted, and the invisible wall that separated her from everyone else still stood, firm and high. Yet, something within her had shifted. A tiny, fragile seed of something that felt like courage had been planted, watered by the simple, unexpected kindness of her Alpha. This fragile new feeling was put to the test on a morning thick with a tense, metallic scent in the air. Ragnar had been on edge since dawn, his commands sharper, his gaze constantly scanning the tree line. Patrols reported strange scents at the border. The sharp, sour smell of pine needles crushed by a foreign boot, the faint, musky odor of a wolf that did not belong to Ironclaw. The rival Shadow Fang pack was testing their boundaries, a dangerous game of power and territory that every pack member understood. The air itself seemed to hum with a low-grade anxiety. Warriors like Sonia were eager, itching for a fight to prove their worth, while the older members of the pack wore grim, knowing expressions. Maeve felt it all like a coming storm, a pressure building in her ears. Her own timid wolf was curled into a tight, fearful ball in the back of her mind, making her feel even more human, more separate than usual. The conflict erupted not with a roar, but with a single piercing howl of alarm from the western border. It was a sound that froze the blood and set every heart hammering. In an instant, the clearing became a whirlwind of organized chaos. Ragnar, his face a mask of fierce determination, shouted orders, his voice cutting through the panic. "Warriors with me. Everyone else to the safe hall." There was a great surge of movement, the powerful bodies of the pack's fighters shifting mid-stride into their wolf forms, a breathtaking and terrifying display of raw power. They streamed into the forest, a river of fur and fury, following their alpha to defend their home. Maeve, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, ran with the other non-fighters, the elders, the parents with very young children, towards the reinforced stone building at the center of the territory. But as she ran, her eyes caught a flash of reckless movement. Sonia, in her zeal to prove herself, had broken from the main group of warriors, charging ahead into a dense, narrow thicket, pursuing what she thought was a lone scout. Was a trap. From the shadows of the thicket, 3 large, grizzled shadow fang wolves emerged, their lips pulled back in savage snarls, cutting off Sonia's retreat. She fought with the fierce, desperate strength she was known for, but she was outnumbered and surrounded. Her defiant snarls turned into yelps of pain as one of the wolves lunged, its teeth sinking deep into her hind leg. From her position near the safe hall door, Maeve saw it all. She saw Sonia, the girl who had made her life a misery, stumble and fall. She saw the triumphant gleam in the eyes of the rival wolves as they closed in for the final blow. A whirlwind of emotions tore through Maeve, fear, a shocking lack of satisfaction, and then, a surge of something else, something clear and decisive. This was not about Sonia. This was about the pack. An Ironclaw wolf was down. She couldn't let one of her own be killed, no matter how cruel that wolf had been to her. Without a single thought for her own safety, without a plan, Maeve turned and ran. She didn't shift, she couldn't. She ran on her 2 human legs, her small form darting between trees, driven by an instinct she never knew she possessed. As she ran, a strange warmth began to bloom in her chest, a feeling not of fire but of pure, brilliant light. It spread down her arms, tingling in her fingertips. The frightened whimper of her inner wolf was suddenly silenced, replaced by a new, resonant hum of power. She burst into the small clearing where the attack was happening, and without a sound, she threw herself between the injured Sonia and the advancing shadow fang wolves. They paused, confused by this fragile human girl who dared to stand before them. Maeve didn't raise her fists. She didn't snarl. She simply knelt, placing her palms flat on the leaf-strewn ground. The moment her skin touched the earth, the warmth in her chest exploded outwards. A silvery, shimmering light erupted from her hands, flowing over the ground like liquid moonlight. It rose up, forming a glowing, semi-transparent wall between her packmate and their enemies. The light was intensely bright, not hot, but vibrantly alive. The shadow fang wolves recoiled, snarling in confusion and pain, their eyes blinded by the pure, healing energy that was anathema to their violent intent. The wall held them back, giving the pursuing Ironclaw warriors, led by a frantic Ragnar, the precious seconds they needed to reach them. The warriors surged past the bewildered Maeve, engaging the disoriented rivals and quickly driving them back. The fight was over in moments. As the last of the shadow fang wolves fled, a heavy silence fell, broken only by Sonia's pained whimpers. All eyes turned to Maeve. The light from her hands had faded, but now it gathered again, softer this time as she crawled to Sonia's side. The warrior wolf had a deep, ugly gash on her leg, bleeding freely onto the forest floor. Maeve, her hands trembling slightly, reached out and gently laid them over the wound. A collective gasp went through the pack. The silvery light flowed from her palms into the torn flesh. They watched, utterly mesmerized, as the bleeding stopped, the raw edges of the wound seemed to knit together, and the angry red inflammation faded to a pale, healthy pink. In less than a minute, all that remained was a thin, silvery scar. Sonia shifted back into her human form, staring at her leg with wide, disbelieving eyes, then up at Maeve, her face a complex map of shock, shame, and awe. Ragnar, who had also shifted back, stood frozen. He had seen it all. He had seen her run, unarmed and fearless. He had seen the legendary light, a power spoken of only in the oldest of tales, the bedtime stories told to young pups about the great heroes of their kind. He looked at Maeve, no longer seeing a weak girl, but a young woman glowing with a residual, otherworldly luminescence, her chest heaving, her mossy eyes wide with the shock of what she had just done. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep into his alpha's soul, what she was. She was not weak. She was not a human. She was a light weaver, the most rare and precious kind of werewolf to ever exist, a living shield and a gentle healer, a myth made flesh standing before him in his own territory. And in that moment as he looked at her, the strange pull in his chest became an undeniable roaring truth. The forest in the days that followed the battle was a different place, and so was the pack. The air, once thick with tension and the sharp scent of conflict, now hummed with a new, uncertain energy. The name on everyone's lips was not Ragnar's for once, but Maeve's. It was spoken in hushed, reverent tones by some, in confused and hesitant whispers by others. She was no longer the human, but she had no new name yet. She was the girl who glowed. She was the one who had faced down the Shadow Fang with light, not claws. She had saved Sonia, the very person who had tormented her most, and that single act of impossible grace had thrown the entire pack's understanding of strength into a disarray as tangled as the forest undergrowth. Maeve herself moved through this new world in a daze. The memory of the light pouring from her hands was both terrifying and exhilarating. She kept to her small cabin, the weight of everyone's stares feeling heavier than any laundry basket she had ever carried. Ragnar saw the division creeping in like a slow poison. He heard the muttered arguments near the fire pit. "It's not natural," one warrior would grumble. "She's never been one of us, why should she be now?" another would agree. But then an elder would counter, "She saved a packmate with a power from the old tales. This is a blessing." And Sonia, to everyone's surprise, was often silent, her usual arrogance replaced by a thoughtful, almost shamed quiet. Ragnar knew that the strength of a pack was not just in its warriors' muscles, but in the unity of its spirit. This uncertainty, this crack in their foundation, was more dangerous than any rival pack. He had spent nights pacing the floor of his cabin, the image of Maeve, luminous and brave, seared into his mind. He thought of her quiet dignity in the face of cruelty, her courage in the face of danger, and the incredible, selfless power she possessed. The strange pull he had felt towards her from the beginning now made perfect, brilliant sense. It was not pity. It was not mere curiosity. It was the deep, instinctual recognition of a true partner. He knew what he had to do. He had to make a statement so clear, so powerful, that it would shatter the doubts and unite his people once and for all. He called for a full pack gathering at the rising of the moon, the same moon under which he had first chosen to speak to her instead of run. The entire Ironclaw pack assembled in the main clearing, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of the great central fire. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. They all knew this was important. Maeve stood near the back as was her habit, trying to make herself small, her heart fluttering like a trapped bird. She saw Ragnar step into the circle of firelight, and his presence immediately commanded silence. He stood tall and proud, his alpha power radiating from him, but his stormy eyes were not fierce. They were serious and filled with a profound conviction. He began to speak, his voice strong and clear, carrying to every single member of the pack. "For generations," he said, "we have measured strength by the sharpness of a tooth and the power in a shift. We have valued the force that can break an enemy." He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the warriors, including a downcast Sonia. "But the recent days have shown us a different truth. A more important truth." He turned then, his eyes finding Maeve in the crowd. A path seemed to clear between them as every head turned to look at her. "True strength," Ragnar continued, his voice softening just for her, "is the courage to protect even when you are afraid. It is the kindness to help even when you have been hurt. It is the power to heal, not just to harm." He took a step towards her. Then another. The pack was so silent you could hear the crackle of the fire and the distant hoot of an owl. "We called her weak," he said, now standing directly before her, his voice filled with a new, tender emotion that made Maeve's breath catch. "But our true strength was hidden in the most beautiful and courageous heart among us." And then he did the unimaginable. The mighty Alpha Ragnar, leader of the fierce Ironclaw pack, slowly went down on one knee before her. He bowed his head, a sign of ultimate submission and respect. The collective intake of breath from the pack was like a sudden wind. "Maeve," he said, looking up into her wide, stunned eyes, his voice filled with a love as clear and steady as her own light. "You are our true strength. You are our heart. My Luna. Will you do me the greatest honor? Will you stand by my side and help me lead this pack?" Tears, bright and unchecked, streamed down Maeve's face. They were not tears of sadness or pain, but of a joy so complete it overflowed. The loneliness, the teasing, the years of feeling like she didn't belong, all of it melted away in the warmth of his gaze and the profound respect of his bow. She saw not just an alpha, but the male who had seen her when no one else did. She saw her Ragnar. She nodded, her voice a soft, breathless whisper that carried through the silent clearing. Yes, Ragnar. I will. A smile, radiant and true, broke across her face. He rose to his full height, and instead of taking her hand, he simply offered his own for her to take. She placed her hand in his, and as their fingers laced together, a new kind of power filled the clearing. A power of unity, of hope, of a love that was both gentle and unbreakable. He turned, leading her to the front of the pack, to stand beside him as an equal. As one, as if moved by a single thought, every member of the Ironclaw pack, from the oldest elder to the youngest child, and even a tearful, truly humbled Sonia, bowed their heads to their new Luna. The story of the weak one had ended. The legend of the hidden Luna had truly begun. Their future together was a path yet to be walked, but they would walk it side by side, the fierce Alpha and his gentle, powerful light weaver, ready to face whatever came next together. If you've been swept away by the story of Ragnar and Maeve, and you're longing for more tales of hidden strength, fierce love, and the magic that lies in the most unexpected hearts, then make sure you subscribe to the channel. By subscribing, you'll be the first to know when our next journey begins. A new adventure is always just around the corner, waiting to be discovered.